When you're piecing the blocks together, every seam is going to have at least 2 stacked seams within them. And what a stacked seam is, there are 3 here. This is the end where these seams have to match on these 2 sides, but they're both pressed in the same direction. So when you stitch them, they're going to be stacked on top of each other. So you have one there sometimes, but you'll always have 2 stacked seams with the flying geese. So I'm going to show you 2 methods of handling these stacked seams. The first one is how Quiltworz teaches. They teach to interlock and then move the seam back. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this top seam allowance and fold it back as if it was pressed in that direction. Then we're going to interlock them, and you can feel with your fingers that they're interlocked. Then you take a pin and you just pin it while it's folded like that. So we go to the next one, and I'm going to show you how I do it. We match the seams, the top edge here, and then try to match the seams as best we can just by eye, and then fold this back and see if the seams are lined. So they're lined pretty well. Then we're going to take a pin and place it right in that little ditch. The seam makes a little ditch. So that's where you place that. And let's do it again here. Match them, and you can feel with your fingers the little ditch. And then fold this top one down and see how well you did. Then place the pin right in the ditch. And so next, when we sew this, we're going to start here, and just before we get to this edge, we're going to take the pin out and flip this back up where it belongs, and then stitch it in that position. And then here we're just going to stitch as we come to them, and they'll stay in the same position. When you're stitching the seam, I start at the edge with my needle down, and I take a few stitches and end with the needle down. Then we're going to stitch until we get close to the seam. This is the stacked seam that was interlocked, and the seam allowance was pinned in the interlocking position. So before we get to this, we have to flip it back. So let's take a few stitches. Let's remove the pin and just fold it back, and I'll have to raise my presser foot. This is the point where I usually end up messing it up, and it shifts a little bit, and I haven't been able to find a way to not have it shift, but plenty of people use this method fine. So it's up to you. Try each way and see which works best for you. So I'm holding it in place, and I'm going to stitch it down. Now I'm going to stitch until I get to the next point that's pinned. And this is the one I pinned already stacked with my pin here. You have 2 choices here. You can leave the pin in if you're a person who likes to stitch over the pins, or you can pull the pin out as soon as you get to it. So let's try just pulling it out before we get to it. So we make sure the seam allowance goes under the needle, and then at the last minute we're going to pull the pin out and hold it in place and stitch. Now if you're a person who likes to stitch over the pins, we'll stitch over this one. Maybe not. My little 1/4-inch foot held that pin, so I couldn't do it. So once you clear it, you just stitch to the very end, and make sure you line up all of your edges here on the edge, on the side. So let's see how we did. Here is one, and the seam looks pretty good. Here's the other one, and the seam that match pretty good. And here is the first one, matches really well. Let me show you different. So you can see your seams match up really well. And here's another one. and here's the third one. So if you have any that don't match up and it bugs you and you want to redo it, don't rip out the whole seam. Simply rip an inch on either side and then just match the seam again and ease it in so it'll fit.